Hello and welcome to Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast, with your host, Buddy Sotelo Esquire, and back from a one-week hiatus, Dr. Mike Lano. So, wrestling's premier photographer. Thanks. Anyway, missing in action right now is Evan, and we were supposed to have our guest Brian Boman, but maybe we'll work him in next week. But right now it's just me and the good doctor.
You know, when I bring up Ryan Boman online, I was trying to remember his history because it's been a while since I've been on when he's been on. It brings up a championship English soccer player. That is not your...
Yeah, no, it's not B-O-W-M-A-N, it's B-O-M-A-N. That's probably why you got the wrong one. I made the mistake of putting the W in the first time I had him on the show, and I've corrected that mistake ever since. It's easy to make. But anyway,
you brought it up. We did the tribute 2 weeks ago, last time I was on, for Pete Sanchez and Pete Reeves, two long-time historic tri-WF and even later WWF with Vince Jr. after senior talents who died, enhancement talents. But, you know, and you told me the other day, oh yeah, we're going to have Ryan on, and we're going to do a Kevin Sullivan tribute, a guy I've known since 1976, and Kevin Sullivan, but have watched even well before that. In fact, actually, I photographed him in '74, right before he left for Florida. But that's Kevin Sullivan. But then we have Arthur dying at age 81. Arthur, the Wild Samoans, originally the Babyface Islanders that we'll get into, Russ, but dying. You know, Sika, his legit brother and tag partner for the decades, 70s, 80s, early 90s, passed in June.
It's sort of fitting, isn't it? It's just weird. It's like those two guys were joined in life, and they're basically joined in death. Wouldn't you like say it's like, you know, in only 2 months after or 3 months after the other brother died, it just... Oddly enough, the sort of thing happened with my dad. When my dad died, his brother, who was 7 years younger than him, wound up dying like about 4 months later. It just, sometimes that happens, you know?
But it's like couples that, you know, husband and wife, one passes, the other dies within minutes, weeks, however long, from grief. I mean, they were such nice guys. I don't know. Maybe we'll start with Kevin, but let me play something a little bit. This is courtesy of my friends at Busted Open, and this is audio from the Samoans. Hopefully I can find some on Kevin.
First from the island of Samoa, weighing 307 pounds, Samoan number 1. From the Isle of Samoa, at a combined weight of 614 pounds, making the first appearance in this arena, here are the Samoans.
You know, we'll have some more, but that was...
Back in the days before you had, you know, big entrance themes, before you had the Titantrons, before you had the indoor pyro, before you had the electronic noise generation that just, I mean, especially when you...
Joe McHugh, who was in his 80s there announcing, you know, the hair stands up for many of us on our arms and the back of our neck. It was, you know, very exciting. And those were the territory days. Let me at least give some brief stuff, because a lot of people out there have been getting it wrong on radio. Samoans often Sika, and we'll get into, you know, the real names and everything. Tremendously sweet guys. But one of their earliest gigs was coming right into, you know, Russ and I, long Bay Area guys, even though I'm down stuck in...
They were huge. They were totally over in the Bay Area.
Well,
absolutely.
But they were baby faces. They were the Islanders. And they started, and they weren't, you know, they were kind of mid-card. They were just gelling and all that stuff. They did a show or two for Ed Francis in Honolulu at the HIC Arena, which was renamed Blaisdell. But they came in and they were there for Roy Shire for about 5 months before they went in and worked for the Sheik in Detroit. So again, we're talking pre-1975, thereabouts. And they even did a bit for the IWA, which utilized a lot of the Sheik's guys. The IWA was the co-owner of the Chicago White Sox, Eddie Einhorn. His vision to try to take on both Sam Munchnick, president then of the NWA, basically the face of the NWA, and Vince McMahon Sr. of the Tri-WF. And the Islanders, again, babyfaces worked there as well. They later they worked for in Atlanta, but they also they worked a lot of the territories, Mobile and the Panhandle in Florida, which is the connection. Really, we can get into a little bit later of how Kevin Sullivan got the mega Georgia Championship Wrestling deal. But then they come into the Tri-WF. They are only known as Samoan 1 and Samoan 2 early on. And where you heard Gary Michael Capetta first announcing them before one of the all-time greats, and he doesn't get the recognition he deserves, but Joe McHugh, who did all of the Vince McMahon, not all of it, but most all of it, and is best known and associated with Vince's Allentown and Hamburg, PA TV tapings. And they're immediately put with Lou Albano, turned into heels, and by this point...
Yeah, well, once they joined up with Lou Albano, the sky was the limit with them.
It was off to the races.
It was one of the best joinings of talent in the ring with a managerial talent. One of the greatest interview mic munchers of all time, and that's Lou Albano. I don't think
Lou Albano. I have so many stories shooting back or being with him backstage at Madison Square Garden, shooting ringside and stuff. He tried to turn me into a wrestler because he and Tony Altamori, his Sicilian's tag team partner in the 50s, early 60s, ran a wrestling school, and they churned out some good talent. As we heard from Johnny Rods 2 weeks ago, who's turned out a tremendous amount of talent. But Lou Albano, man, he had the gift of gab, and he would change with each team he'd managed. I would say, since I'd seen him with all of those teams, this guy, at the time, managers, it was just wonderful because they had the triumvirate of Blassie, but first it was Albano, then Ernie Roth, the manager, Abdullah Farouk, was renamed. He was just doing the same shtick, but they called him the Grand Wizard. You couldn't get away with that now. And then Blassie was the fourth, debuting with Nikolai Volkov in like December of 73, January 74. But the magic that Albano first really had it with the Valiant brothers. They even cut a record sort of about the time when Blassie's King of Men, or actually I think it preceded that. But then the second greatest.
Blassie's big one was I Bite the Songs. That was his big, with Pencil Neck Geek.
Pencil Neck Geek was the best of the four. And
right, and that's on his...
Very well, Johnny Legend, who's Johnny Margulies.
We had him on the show. Years ago.
Johnny was the one who produced that, and his sister, Lynn Margulies, who, if you remember, my dental practice was at 450 Sutter in San Francisco, but the College of Fine Arts, San Francisco.
That's where my dad practiced as well.
At 450, yeah. It's
450.
A big.
He was on the fourth floor.
But Johnny Legend's sister, who was involved with the two movies, Breakfast with Blassie and Hello from Hollywood, basically Andy.
I'm from Hollywood.
I'm from Hollywood. Anyway, it was that one. She was a brief girlfriend. There was a lot of famous women who were brief girlfriends. But Lynn and comic Elaine Boozler were the longest ones, with Andy Kaufman, who was a genius and loved wrestling. He grew up like Mike Tyson did on Bruno Sammartino and all of that Vince McMahon Sr. genius stuff.
I still think he's one of the great underrated, greatest heels of all time. I think he's, yes, like maybe Piper when he was in his worst and the Iron Sheik and so forth. Andy Kaufman.
Yeah, Andy Kaufman. Well,
I think he was one of the greatest heels.
Total comic genius.
Yeah, but also
when he was on chemo, let me just throw this out before I forget. Okay. He went to one of his last film premiere at the New Art Theater on Santa Monica Boulevard in Santa Monica, California, but he was on chemo and all that stuff. He had like just a big white mohawk and all the hair he'd lost from chemo on the sides at this film thing. And one of the great heels. And you heard all of the famous stuff. Like, he never cashed any of Jerry Jarrett's checks, not a one. He was making enough money from Taxi while he was indulging this thing that Vince McMahon Sr. had turned him down. And you can see George Napolitano photos of Andy Kaufman with Afa and Sika from that time period. But he asked if he could do some heel stuff, like a little angle for Vince Sr. Vince turned him down, but Bill Apter connected him with Jerry Jarrett, who was all up for it, and Jerry Lawler was certainly up for it too. And that put.
Let's go back to the Wild Samoans for a sec, and my impression, because they were, you saw them more as the, when they were Samoan 1 and 2 and all that stuff. My recollection is like seeing the Wild Samoans in the ring. It's one of the first times, like, that was my formative years of wrestling. Remember, I'm younger than you. So, like, when I was a really little kid, like, the Wild Samoans blew me away. Like, that was one of the things that made me absolutely love wrestling to start with. Was like the Samoans tagging with Lou Albano, going up against Peter Maivia and Pat Patterson. That was like a feud that was crazy when I was growing up. And like the thing that you wanted to get your tickets to see, we didn't get tickets to see because my parents would have rather died than go to a wrestling match. But like on TV,
we're touring and they came like to the Cow Palace because Vince Jr. started touring immediately when Roy Shire retired and closed shop, which was like January of '81. So Vern Gagne came into, both Vern and Vince came in to pick the bones of Shire, but if you're talking Bay Area, and that was like the first place Vince McMahon Jr. got to promote and do some tours. And so he focused on the Cow Palace while Vern Gagne focused on the Oakland Indoor Arena next to the Coliseum. But did you get to see them at all when they would come out and do those tours? Because they pretty much were done.
I did not go to a wrestling match until the 80s. I never went to a live wrestling match until the 80s when I could take myself. When I had my own car and I could drive myself to go to the Cow Palace or the Oakland Coliseum. As I told you, my parents would not have been caught dead at a wrestling match. That was like the last thing. They wanted me to go to the opera. They wanted me to go to the symphony. They didn't want me to do anything lowbrow or have be part of.
Much different than those kind of arts. It's just a different, more visceral.
They didn't recognize it as that. They saw it as just the absolute worst of the worst. My mom didn't like any kind of violence at all, so I don't know how she gave birth to me.
Let me just alert the audience that this is a Afa, the Wild Samoans. We're probably obviously going to talk about Sika and also Kevin Sullivan tribute. That's what tonight's show is about. There's a lot of interconnection.
They read the description before they clicked on it. You don't have to bring it up. They if they read on the description on YouTube, they're fine, or on the Facebook.
About the Samoans too, depending on their territory, they were managed by Sonny King in Georgia Championship Wrestling, but Ernie Ladd in other territories, I think.
I always remember them being managed by Lou Albano.
Yeah. Well, that was the best, but still, and even Don Carson when they were working in Alabama.
Because they weren't really great on the mic. But you had Lou Albano, they didn't need anyone.
Yeah. They're very gentle voiced guys, very giving, very honest.
But in the ring, they really delivered a believable product and really showed. I mean, they would be examples that I would show people of, like, if there's two guys you wouldn't want to mess around with, that would really probably beat the tar out of you if you really, pushed them the wrong way. That would have been Afa and Sika. And they raised, you look at the kind of kids they raised. They know how to raise tough kids.
Well, Sika's the father of Roman Reigns, for example, which is pretty amazing. And you look at some of the guys that died too young, Eki and Rodney, who was just the sweetest guy.
Yokozuna, right?
Yeah, I toured around with him, got to drive him around, and was also there for the infamous he and Abby trying to get into the cab, and he was still Coquina Maximus at this time, but also was with Rodney Yokozuna. This was after Vince let him go, sadly, Vince Jr. He was working in Mexico and working on lucha shows in California, like at Angel Stadium in Anaheim, and also in San Jose. Forget where Conan brought that whole AAA show, but the main event was a 6-man with Conan, Mascaras, I forget who else was on that against Yokozuna, Matt Bourne doing Doink, and one other tremendous heel. It was this, outdoor show in San Jose. It was pretty amazing stuff. And Yoke worked some county fairs. But note, a lot of people don't know, Mark Henry was, when he started, he was put with Yokozuna. He was Yokozuna's young boy, doing all the stuff Yoke would say, I need this, I need that.
Well, and also, let's also remember Umaga, and what a big factor he was. At least could have been. I mean, you think if Umaga was still around now, what a big part he'd be playing in the whole.
The whole family is just a wealth of great athletes. I'm trying to go over not just the big family tree that they put on, Roman Reigns put on TV before Mania earlier this year, which is tremendous, and it had Jacob Fatu, who is the son of Sacramento-based Sam Fatu, who was Tama of Haku and Tama the Islanders, but he was also, what was his name before that? Was he the Tonga Kid in the WWF?
Yeah, I think so, and he was one of the head shrinkers, right?
He was that family member. But you look at that lineage, and there was a wrestler, Neff Mayava, who was related somehow to Peter Maivia, I think a distant cousin. He was the first big-time, globally recognized national.
Hello.
Them as the Islanders at all?
Yes. In the IWA, which we got their TB, they came to New York and New Jersey, and the Islanders were part of it. And they were much thinner and obviously younger, and they were impressive even then, and getting pushed even then.
They didn't have the beards or the really long hair. They were big, but not as big as they would later get, later on. I mean, one of the first times I saw them before they even went to Vince, where they pretty much stayed once they went there, was on Georgia Championship Wrestling. They were managed first by, they had a series of managers, Don Arson Carson, then Bearcat Wright managed them in Florida a bit, and then Ernie Ladd managed them for Bill Watts' territory, and as well as Georgia. And Ernie Ladd would come out with the lava over his pants. They just wore the lava, and that was it. They had bare legs under, these Hawaiian sort of shorts, traditional shorts. But seeing Ernie Ladd do that and then cutting the promos for them as their manager, their heel manager, once they became the Wild Samoans, and of course then they go to Vince Sr., and once they were paired with Albano, the rocket ship to the moon was on their backs.
Yeah, on my wrestling page, Evan Ginsberg's Old School Wrestling Memories, I did a whole tribute in a video blog, and I was saying how at Madison Square Garden, these guys were so over that they both, Alpha and Sika, got solo shots at Backlund. And you never saw that with Bruno and any of the tag team champions, not at the Garden anyway, at some of the smaller venues. But, they were basically pushed as unbeatable. And all of a sudden, the Intercontinental belt got very hot also. So you would have something like Snooker and Morocco, and that was going to move the tickets anyway. So they would just have both Samoans in title shots. And they also had that at Nassau Coliseum, from what I remember, and other venues. But these guys were on fire back then.
Yeah, I was saying to Mike before he came in, is that they were the first tag team that I remember that was kind of booked as an unstoppable team.
Yeah.
that they could just run roughshod over everybody, and especially when they were booked in squash matches, those would only last like 30 seconds. Those were just like in, out, beat the guys, then they're done, walk away. There wasn't the slow arm holds and the just the slow punch kick stuff. They would just do the get over like the Road Warriors were. They were sort of to me like the early version of the Road Warriors, and I was always that was something that influenced me to really love wrestling as a little kid. Just to see these two guys that come in like an unstoppable force. I think that's something that when done correctly is one of the great things about tag team wrestling. I think when you find guys that you can really believe are just this devastating pair of guys that can just run roughshod over people, it's fascinating to watch. That's why I always love the Road Warriors. But back to offense.
I want to hear what Evan, when you first saw them, live, your experiences in seeing them live progressively from Samoans 1 and 2. I don't know how long that lasted. Just maybe 3 months before they finally gave them names, off in Sika. But what did it feel like seeing them, live at all these venues?
Well, they were fierce, and they were so convincing. Even though we were smartened up, they were almost scary. They were almost scary. They would come out and it was just like this. They just came at you, and no matter who they were facing, Santana and Putski, whoever the case may be, it almost felt like, how could you possibly beat these guys? They seemed impervious to pain, and it was just a very convincing gimmick, and they sold it incredibly well, and it's hard to believe they're both gone. I was also talking on my page. Afa was instrumental in the making of the wrestler. He and his guys helped train Mickey Rourke, and I would see him every day. And the guy was always warm, friendly, kind. The students put him on a pedestal. They loved him. They revered him. He was like a father figure. And he was totally down to earth. It's like, I think of them as one of the great tag teams of all time. And, you just walked up to him. Hey, brother, the guy couldn't be any nicer. Just a regular guy. And
Pops, all of his students called him Pops. That's what.
Yeah, it was like a father figure to all of them. I could see it. And, he didn't big time anybody. And just a regular guy and beloved. And, I've said 1,000 times on this show, I have a love-hate relationship with everything in wrestling, but this is one guy I never heard anybody say a bad word about. I'm saying it sincerely. I mean,
his reputation. And look at what the foundation that the Samoans built that has pretty much made wrestling what it is today. You can't talk about the history of wrestling without including the Anoa family and everyone that was part of this whole bloodline that we, literally it's as big as things are today. But also, since we have you on, I want to, and I'm trying to patch in Ryan right now as we speak, but I'd like for you to mention your historian friend that passed, because Mike and I weren't as attached to it. We didn't know him that well, but you did. So could you please give a tribute to him while we have you back here?
Who are we talking about? So many guys died. I don't even know who you're talking about.
The guy who was in the Historian Hall of Fame. I
have no idea.
You'd sent me a thing earlier in the week.
You better edit this out too, because we're going to sound like morons.
It's all right. It's.
I have no idea who you're talking about. So many guys have died.
I'll look it up. But what I was saying, if you can edit this in post, was the lineage kind of began with Neff Maiyava wrestling in the late 40s, 50s, and he was a distant relative of High Chief. Well, he was then, they just called him Prince Peter Maivia when he started for Ed Francis in Honolulu. That is basically where Peter Maivia started, and then came to work for Roy Shire, where he just shot up in stardom. And the reason and the how and the why he got to try WF was Pat Patterson. Anybody that had worked for Shire that Pat saw talent in, from Morocco to him later in 1979, 80, throwing a bone to Ray Stevens when he could barely move after 2 motorcycle accidents, etc. And he sort of lessened the heat so Mr. Fuji could return back. And there was just a wealth. Morocco, who Pat had referred to Eddie Graham from San Francisco and Oregon. Morocco was a product of Hawaii as well, and I'm surprised he's not in that bloodline, because he was, close to the family, but not anywhere near blood related. But all of these guys, but especially, and often Sika from their days, because Pat, saw them, was there the whole time with them, and had worked with them before they let the fans into the venue when they came in as the Islanders. So. So that bloodline is pretty amazing, and all of these guys, like you look at, I think Arthur had 3 sons, and I'm not sure if 3 sons who became huge superstars for Vince Jr. I think they're all gone. Somebody can correct me on that, but without the lineage in front of us, it's so massive. So massive, Nia Jax, anybody that you can think of, and guys,
Nia Jax, Russell Jackman, they're all part of the bloodline. Russell's like the 8th cousin. Yeah.
Not quite.
I just made that up.
Yeah, there's Fatu. I'm not sure whose son he is, but he is going to be the next guy like Jacob Fatu to join in that family.
I think they should extend this bloodline plot line for another 12 years. Like they haven't done. It hasn't gone on long enough already. Oh my God.
Russ, you're right. This is a guy. Actually, I'm wrong. I knew and worked for Dennis Brent. Evan, it was Dennis Brent who passed. Dennis was my first editor, my first and best editor at WCW Magazine. He helped get me right back to shoot that Tokyo Dome, Flair Fujinami, March 21st of 1991 Tokyo Dome show. I'm the only foreigner white guy shooting ringside amongst 19. All the rest of them were Japanese photographers. And then there was me shooting that whole card, the one that had the Meltzer Observer's 5-star Steiner Sasaki and the big Sting Muta blow-off match. And, of course, main evented with the Flair dropping the NWA World title clean to Fujinami, who put up his IWGP World Championship, although then WCW VP Jim Hurd, who was a complete idiot on TV, that the title was held up, which was bullshit. But anyway.
Hey, Brian, are you there?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Just need to turn on your camera.
It's great to see Mr. Lano. How are you, sir?
I'm all right.
It's kind of dark in my place, Russell.
Often Sika debuting first for Ed Francis, then coming in as the Islanders for Roy Shire in our San Francisco territory, and then the Sheik, and even IWA, working briefly for Eddie Einhorn's IWA, which was an attempt in 1975 for 2 years to take on both Sam Muchnick's NWA and Vince Sr.'s Tri-WF, well before they ever became the Wild Samoans, well before they became heels, grew the hair, grew the beard, as Evan saw. But Ryan, what was your experience with the Samoans? We're paying tribute in a couple of minutes next to Kevin Sullivan.
I know all you guys are the best. Kevin's death, I think when it happened, I had great experiences with him. There are a lot of people who might not have liked him, I guess, for whatever reason. But to me, he was always very, very intelligent. He was bright in ways that, like, a lot of people in wrestling weren't. Like, Kevin could articulate about wrestling, and make it like he could compare it to, like, pro sports or the movies. He had a real deep understanding of pop culture and how it was portrayed in wrestling. And I think that's the one thing that I always liked about him. He's a real deep person, and a lot of our conversations weren't even about wrestling. He would just talk about sports or, a movie he watched or whatever. He was a really good guy, and he taught me a lot. He taught me about thinking outside the box. When it comes to wrestling, pro wrestling, you got to think a little different. Well, Kevin kind of had that gift. That's the way I thought about him, and I'm sorry to hear about his passing.
We all are.
His history. Let's just do a timeline really briefly. Evan can chime right in because he knows this too. Kevin, although he'd wrestled about 2.5 years before Vince Sr. started putting him on cards, he wasn't quite the jobber because he kind of got little gentle pushes, but he's there 73 to 70, maybe late 74-ish before Vince Sr. sends him to Florida to Vince Sr.
Wasn't he a power lifter first? Wasn't he a power lifter?
Well, that came a little bit later. But what I'm saying is he's there at the same time as Iron Mike McCord, who was paired with Albano, given a gentle push. Now, Iron Mike McCord would become Austin Idol. So Vince Sr. sends him to Eddie Graham, being Kevin Sullivan, and Iron Mike McCord leaves about the same time. But they link up. They were already friends, and then they link up in like Knoxville and or the Florida Panhandle, where Austin Idol was really getting over it. He was already starting to work for Ole Anderson Championship Wrestling, and it changed the name, adopting the Austin Idol thing. And Idol is working and talking with Kevin. He goes, I'm going to push you to Ole. And he started trying to push Ole into bringing him in, and Ole kept saying, too small, too small. Seen all his tapes from Florida. But Idol convinced him to come in. He said, just give him some time. And Kevin came in, and because of the finesse he had, he was a total wrestling historian, as Ryan said, the finesse he had on promos, he became bigger than life. And if you watched him over the years in Georgia Championship Wrestling, he started, Evan remembers this, his body got bigger and bigger and bigger. And while he was doing that, he became a very subtle heel. So he's this beloved face, working these programs with different guys, including Idol as the heel. And then he starts building up his body. And he was off to the races, often in semi-mains or mains in Georgia, working with Tommy Rich and some of the rest of them. And just magic. He never lost his connection with Florida, of course. When we lost Eddie Graham, Kevin really went to town with all of that stuff. And, met Nancy down there and helped really get Luna Vachon going and incorporated Bob Roop. But the interesting thing here, let's go back into a period a lot of people don't know. For about a year to 15 months, Royce Shire in San Francisco, we're back to Royce Shire, San Francisco territory. He'd lost his number 1 and number 2 guys in Ray Stevens, way earlier, but then Pat Patterson in 76. So Eddie Graham sends Shire, Kevin Sullivan to be lead babyface and Bob Roop to be lead heel. And they feud, and they started, the territory had really gone downhill a bit in 75, but then it went up when Kevin and Roop came in slowly. And the big angle that Kevin would reuse elsewhere in Knoxville, in the Panhandle, and of course for Eddie Graham, he had his legit dad ringside at TV in Sacramento, Channel 40. And Bob Roop attacks his dad, brings him, out and destroys him on the floor, and that set months and months of gates. So whereas in LA, it was Piper and Chavo Guerrero and his family, in San Francisco, Roop and Sullivan. And Roop brings in Barry Orton of the Orton, Bob Orton Jr.'s brother, to, play off of him, sort of almost like Stevie Richards to Scotty Levy Raven. That was like the earliest, what we'd see Raven incorporate and use later on. But people don't even remember Kevin Sullivan as number 1 babyface for San Francisco. This is before Idol finally got him into Georgia Championship Wrestling, where Kevin just was an amazing on-air. Evan, what do you remember about Kevin on the old Georgia Championship Wrestling on TBS every Saturday?
I remember more from Florida, and in fact, I went to Florida on vacation, I would say 1985 or 86, and there's Sullivan's Army, and Mark Lewin came out of the sea, and Bob Roop had half his head shaved, and Luna Vachon had the other half of her head shaved.
They were crazy. That whole Army of Darkness thing was absolutely over the top. I mean, it was really, there wasn't a faction, anything like that, And I love that. I love
it. So funny. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Evan. But what's so crazy about thinking about those times is Kevin was real close with the Grahams, like when they were in Florida, and when Eddie died, that was hard on him. And I guess like a lot of Mike committed suicide also. Like they all kind of they suffered from depression really bad. And Kevin said they were always very close to him, and he really kind of, when Eddie passed, that was hard on him, because he was kind of a father figure to Kevin.
And I've ridden around with Kevin a lot and asked him. He was a fan of heavy metal, so naturally he loved Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden and bands like that. And he was sort of the personification, wrestling's personification of this heavy metal, sort of the darker side of metal, in particular Ozzy Osbourne biting, the heads off a bat, which was sort of kind of blown out of proportion stuff. But Kevin loved that stuff, as did Nancy. And I forget what happened to, there was Luna, but there was also Locke, another female, besides Fallen Angel, which was Nancy, Sullivan, later to be Nancy Sullivan.
And Superstar Billy Graham was part of it briefly.
And Dark Journey was part of that ensemble. The Missing Link, I think, was
ensemble, like the modern jazz quartet. Yes.
Well, a collection of freaks. How do you like that?
One of the funniest things, one of the funniest stories about Kevin, and I will tell you this story because Bill Apter, I said for many years, he's probably he was a great mentor to me and somebody that really helped me a lot in my career. But Kevin, I guess Bill put out a magazine, all the old PWI magazines and stuff.
He was
kayfabe magazine.
My editor. He was only my editor. The guy that put out the magazines was our publisher, our big boss, Stanley Weston.
Yeah, Mr. Weston. Yeah, but I guess they put out on the cover of the magazine. I guess somehow the title said, "The Devil is my manager," and Kevin was so mad about because he never said the word devil. They didn't pretend to be devil worshippers. They just pretended to be real dark characters. And he called Bill, and he was hot about it. Like Bill's told me that story. He said he called and he said, "Don't say the word devil," because
remember Bill was kind of responsible for. They were all made up interviews. They were trying to please the promoters,
right?
So taking whatever the angle and the characters were in whatever territory, be it Los Angeles with Tolas, Blassie, Chic, etc. But in this case, Florida, yeah, and they would make up now, the last maybe 12 years, PWI, which is our only remnants of Wrestling Review, The Wrestler, Inside Wrestling, all these creations from Stanley Weston. They're at least legit interviews. They actually interview the people instead of that period of time, particularly in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, 80s, where it was 80s. All fictional crap.
Do you remember when they would do the thing where they had the thing where they were on the same phone line together? The two people, I can't remember what it was called, but Bill would write those back in the day where they made it sound like the two guys were on the same phone together. It was all completely made up, but it was great stuff, though. I mean, you got to admit that those kayfabe days were the best.
Oh, let's not forget King Curtis Iakea. He was the leader, the overall boss, way before they kind of watered it down when they brought him into WCW. But the Florida days that Evan and you were talking about, the 85, 86 Magic days, Curtis Iakea was nuts. And his vignettes, most of those guys then, including Kevin Sullivan and Bachman, will say the greatest interview in all of wrestling was King Curtis Iakea, who, again, for Vince Sr., was tag champs with Baron Mikhail Spikluna. Evan remembers that.
Yeah.
Managed by Albano. Albano had an insane amount. I think he managed more tag champions. I can't.
17.
Yeah.
17.
I thought it was like 22.
Those are 17.
No, probably. If you talk about like the other little feds that he did,
Well, the last ones that I remember in WWF was the Bulldogs. Didn't he go babyface? And
once he turned Piper turned to babyface by smashing the
trophy.
That's right.
The framed award over Captain Lou's head. But Kevin,
it's funny to see like how a Bostonian could make himself such a big part of Floridian wrestling history. I mean, you can't think of Florida wrestling. I mean, if you wanted to go and talk 2 sentences about Florida wrestling, Kevin Sullivan would either be in the first sentence or the second sentence or both sentences. Correct?
Oh, Dusty would always come first.
Dusty would be
Dusty, Eddie, and him. Yeah,
Then Kevin Sullivan would be the next name that comes to mind. I was like trying to think of the greatest Floridian wrestlers out there. And, Dusty was in a lot of other territories, but I really feel like Florida was Kevin Sullivan's territory.
Dusty also.
Yeah, but I mean, he really was synonymous with it, and it's funny because he was just not a Southerner. To have someone with the thickest Boston accent, he really would pot the cod of Harvard Yard. He still was like beloved and such a big part of the Florida scene. I always found that kind of interesting.
I want to see if Ryan knows why, because I asked him why on earth. I go, have you lost your mind when he said he left Florida because he was in, I think Delray, Florida was like the last place before he moved to one of these little islands off Washington State. But, he was always talking about doing nighttime scuba diving and stuff, how much he loved Florida. And then, the climate, he loved it being warm all year round. And at least where he was, they didn't really get hit too much with, any of the weather stuff that we're seeing now. But then he moves to, so Ryan, do you know, why did he have family in Washington State? Why did he move all the way out here? And then he went back to Florida, before passing away. I don't know if that's where.
I don't remember how he ended up living on that island, but I mean, he had a boat. Every time I talked to him, he'd say, that accent, like Russell was, brother, I got to go bring my boat in real quick. He was always out, fishing or, like you said, deep sea, scuba diving or
maybe he was looking for Mark Lewin out there.
Maybe he was.
Yes.
Yeah. Lewin's Prince. Oh, you know what? We mentioned Evan was the one who brought this to my attention. Dennis Brent. Let me just say a couple of quick things. I'm actually reading what Evan said. This guy was in a lot of territories. He was helping behind the scenes, wearing multiple hats. He was like lead editor for the programs for World Class for Fritz. So this is from Evan. UWF for Bill Watts, NWA WCW, of course, WCW's newsstand magazine until Colin Bauman took over. That was my second editor for that mag. But he even Dennis Brent worked. He was a roommate of Jim Ross, and they were big baseball aficionados. So of course, they got along with J.J. Dillon and many others then in the 90s, WWE, still WWF. But he had a hand in helping edit WWE's Raw magazine, the last one. But he was, working behind the scenes. He did a lot for Fritz, did things for Eddie Graham in Florida. So we want to honor him besides Alpha and besides Kevin Sullivan. Dennis Brent was honored at Cauliflower Alley Club. I was sitting right next to him and Terry Taylor as we took over a WWE purchase table. And Dennis got honored, and Terry gave the speech before presenting him with his award. So they were old time friends and attended a ton of baseball games themselves. So Kevin was a big baseball fan too. When he worked for an indie promoter in Northern California, he went to go see a couple of A's games. I think
he loved the Red Sox.
Yeah, I think the Sox came in. That's why he wanted to go see the Sox against the A's at the Oakland Coliseum. But a lot of great stories, a lot of funny stuff. He talked about leaving Roy Shire because he was starting to get less and less in his pay envelope while the crowds were increasing. That's why Kevin and Roop left. And they left together and went right back to Florida for Eddie Graham. They're taken right back. So that was...
Yeah, that's crazy, though. The other thing I will always remember about Kevin is, you guys mentioned he became a power lifter. Well, he wasn't tall. He was like, I'm probably 6 inches taller than him. But God, he was about as wide as he was tall. I mean, his shoulders, and he had the biggest calf muscles of anybody. He looked like a power lifter. He
didn't always.
He was built like granite.
People got to see his transformation week by week just watching Georgia Championship Wrestling. He went from this doughy, kind of nondescript body to he was just cut and ripped. within about 7-8 months' time, and he became, as I said earlier, slightly heelish in that process, to where then he turned heel and he started battling all the faces, whether it was Tommy Rich or Wahoo or Brad Armstrong, etc. And one thing too, when he was fully entrenched in Florida, as Russ said, Evan remembers that Vince Sr. in the from like 75 on, we'd get guys from LA, Vern Gagne-Sinn and Billy Robinson. Ric Flair came up from Crockett territory, but Kevin Sullivan made a triumphant return, teaming with Mike Graham on an MSG show. They were Florida tag team champions. They were allowed to bring their belts into the ring on an MSG Vince Sr. card. So it was kind of a nice welcome back to a guy who kind of gotten his national start for Vince Sr. in like 73, 74 before going to Florida. And here in whatever year that was, 77, he's brought back, or no, 78, I think it was, came up with Mike Graham to team on an MSG card.
I don't remember that. I think it might have been Steve Kern, Raymond Kern.
Well, I'll go back and check it, because I'm sure I thought Kevin said that's where Napoleon. Well, I'll go back and check.
I could be wrong. My memory isn't flawless either, 40 plus years. But I saw Kevin Sullivan wrestle the original Sheik for Joe Goodhart. That was amazing. That was great.
Oh,
wow.
That show, you and I were there together. I shot it. It was Kevin Sullivan against Terry Funk underneath Sheik and Abby in the cage.
Yeah. So this is a funny story. You have all the quote unquote smart fans and wrestling media, and the original Sheik walks in, and everybody goes like silent.
Well, they were bowing. They were doing, before it was even a thing, that we're not worthy. When at least on that particular card, which was the second to the last Joel Goodhart, and I shot the last X amount of them. That locker room was stacked. There's Mick, there's Eddie Gilbert, there's Medusa, there's Luna Vachon, just Terry Funk, Kevin, of course. But when she came in with Sabu, and he had to talk Joel into allowing Sabu into the reverse battle royal opener, those guys were like bowing to him. Abby was in there. Abby was like the only guy who didn't bow to Sheik when he came into the locker room.
So, Ryan, I wanted to ask you, when you had time and you spent time with Kevin Sullivan, what do you think is something that he told you that you don't think he told anybody else about, like, wrestling, or something that you learned from him that you think he nobody else knew from your time working with him?
Well, there's a couple things. Well, we talked a lot about the Benoit stuff, because he didn't like, being associated with that. Kevin didn't have anything to do with that. We all know that. But I think the best thing he ever told me, this is the best advice I probably ever got from anybody in wrestling, is I told him, I said, well, I've been putting a couple cards together. I've been doing some things. And he goes, do you book shows? And I said, well, not really, but I just try to put stuff out there I think the people are going to like. And he said, that's all you can do. That's the smartest answer I ever heard. And, and that's wrestling. You put out what you think the people are going to like. And to me, Kevin, as deep as he could be, he kept things, when he talked to you, it was simple. He simplified things, and he could make you understand it. Like I said, I was just a young guy. I didn't know, nothing, at all. But, when he would talk to you, he could make you understand it in a way that, like a child could understand it. So I don't know if there's one particular thing, but it's just some of the stuff that he said was like, wow, yeah, I never thought about it that way. And then once you're around somebody like that, I always say wrestling's like a Rubik's Cube. You can twist it and turn it a million different ways. But once you figure out the Rubik's Cube, you won. Well, I think Kevin figured out the Rubik's Cube. I just thought he was that smart.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, to do what he's done and to be such a legend. The other thing I wanted to ask, did you ever ask him about how he dealt with those gigantic snakes he would drape all over himself when he was in the Army of Darkness?
No, I never asked about that. I guess Nancy owned a big boa constrictor. Nancy she was into some dark stuff too. And I guess she owned a big boa constrictor that they had in the house when they were married, but I really never asked about that. The biggest thing I asked about is when I talked to him was some of the guys he ran with were crazy. I mean, like Kevin, to me, he'd act crazy on television, but some of the guys that he worked with were legitimately crazy.
Like, which ones did he say were really nuts?
Oh God. Well, Mark Lewin was kind of crazy, and Buzz Sawyer.
Whoa.
Everybody,
we all know about Buzz Sawyer out here in Northern California. You can say no more about that.
Yeah, and there was a few
Buzz
people.
Sawyer
He said,
started his school in Sacramento. He would stretch. He would do the thing of stretching guys and tell them, well, after day one, I guess you weren't made for pro wrestling. And he'd keep their entire semester
all their money.
of money.
Yeah.
Let me read this before I have to go to clarify some stuff. Because it does look like in '76, he and Mike Graham did come up and do the one shot at the Garden. They wrestled like Pete Sanchez, who we just lost, and did the tribute.
Yeah, another tribute.
Initially, Sullivan teamed with Austin Idol, challenging the Fabulous Freebirds for the NWA Georgia Tag titles, November 1980. Then they would feud, and Sullivan would turn on him, and Kevin's first heel turn in Georgia in late 1980 was when he won the National Television Championship from Steve Kern on November 29th after Sullivan attacked Kern. And one other guy that was in the Army of Darkness was Jake Roberts briefly. So you can imagine the promos between Kevin and Jake Roberts. That's worth looking up on YouTube or what have you. But Kevin from April to July 81 was working as a heel in Memphis, teaming with Wayne Ferris, Honky Tonk Man, managed by Jimmy Hart. You can imagine those guys battling. Jerry Lawler teamed with Superstar Dundee, and also Lawler with Kern. And then Kevin returns as a heel to Georgia for Ole Anderson, who initially kept telling Austin Idol, I don't want to bring him in, he's too small, but Idol convinced him. So Kevin returns as a heel back to Georgia, November 81. And then he turned face about 4 months later to feud in 1982 with Buzz Sawyer, who we were just talking about, before returning to wrestle for Eddie Graham and help with the book, because Dusty was on the road as a traveling attraction and all of that stuff. So, wow, it's very impressive. And before I forget, the guy that was attached to Kevin at the hip, Bob Roop, he was an amateur collegiate wrestler who just missed out on going to the Olympics.
I went to the same college as Bob Roop. I lived by SIU Carbondale. That's where he went to college, and I went to college there also. So, yeah, Mr. Roop is a kind of a legend here as an amateur wrestler. I don't know if the people here know that he ended up being a pro wrestler, but at the college, he's kind of, I think, probably the biggest star we ever had.
Hell of a talent. Kevin Sullivan working, well, you remember too, he and Jimmy Snuka and Eddie Gilbert were helping Todd Gordon with the earliest incarnation of Eastern Championship Wrestling. But Kevin was friends with the Savoldis. He was the top heel in ICW for a while. And when they were having shows and television all over the place, but he had feuds in the ICW with Austin Idol, his longtime pal, Iron Mike McCord, Billy Graham, Bruiser Brody, Jumpin' Joel Savoldi, and Blackjack Mulligan he brought in all the way from Florida to continue their long feud. I mean, that was a great feud right there that lasted at least about 14 months, Sullivan against Blackjack Mulligan. So great
You guys
talent.
were talking about, I'm sorry.
You
guys were talking about Florida, and you brought up Steve Kern. And I've always heard this. Wasn't he supposed to have the Bob Backlund spot in WWF?
No. Because Sam Munchnick and Eddie Graham and Vern Gagne all told Vince Sr. If Bruno is done, wants the title taken off him. Superstar was just, the longest interim champion up to that point, the interim heel champion. No, all three of those guys, Munchnick, Eddie Graham, Vern Gagne, had pretty much convinced Vince Sr. to utilize Backlund. Not that, but Kern was much smaller, shorter, still a great talent. But
I heard they wanted to use the thing. His dad die in like Vietnam, his dad was a war hero, right?
I'll call him up because he's got, I think his second book is out now, if it's not, coming out.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I think that they kind of wanted to use
His
that
father
as an
was
angle.
a prisoner of war, if I remember correctly.
POW. That's
Yeah.
right.
I don't know if he died over there, but POW. But I've got to go. But don't forget, you guys maybe can discuss this. Kevin managing the varsity club with Mike Rotunda and Rick Steiner. Kevin Smoky Mountain Wrestling for Corny for almost 3 years.
Did it all.
94.
Gosh,
Super
40
impressive
years.
guy.
Well, I did 50 years, right? Kevin, 50 years in the business.
So let me just say this. God bless Kevin Sullivan, Alpha, the two Petes we lost, and Dennis Brent. We've lost too many guys, as Evan said, right at the top. So God bless all of those guys. What great talents, legends. Their mark on the business, creatively and everything, from athletically, Alpha and Sika dying less than 2 months apart. Which is
Let me just say something very quickly. When you are a great artist, and that includes great wrestlers, you've created immortal art, and you have a piece of immortality. 100 years from now, people will be watching Kevin Sullivan and Alpha and Sika and everybody else. It's a little piece of forever, and if it's any consolation, I turn on sometimes Madison Square Garden cards from the 70s and 80s, and I'll be watching a match, and 10 minutes in, it dawns on me, wow, he's gone. He's gone. The ref is gone. The announcers, Monsoon, Heenan, whoever, depending on the year. Even some of the people ringside that we know are gone. And but it's a piece of immortality. And
fucking find someone for WrestleMania 1 that's still around.
Not a lot.
No, Tito Santana, Greg Valentine. That's about it at this, sad stage. And just
I
a
just
reminder.
talked to Tito the other day.
Oh, good. Yeah,
I guess he's doing all right. I mean, he seems like he's doing okay.
We had his daughter on the show a long time ago. But
before I go, you guys, I do have to, they don't always get praise, but at least on their TV, they did nice vignettes for Alpha and even Kevin Sullivan. They showed quite a bit of footage of Kevin, obviously more so on Alpha. And go back and look YouTube or whatever, even Peacock, at the Wild Samoans matches. I think it'll put a smile on your face. And some of it's more entertaining than the stuff going on today. As great as the stuff is today, you can't beat Albano. You cannot beat, and maybe Evan can, maybe you guys will agree with me, you cannot beat the Wiz, Blassie, and Albano. They're just, particularly Albano.
They're always great. Yeah.
So wonderful. Look at him managing the Valiants. I think those are the two greatest pairings, the Valiants and the Samoans for Albano. It was magic all the time, week after week after week, venue after venue.
All right, we'll see you in a couple weeks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Good seeing you.
Mike.
Take care, Mike.
Meanwhile, we're right at the end of the show here. So, Evan, why don't you give your plug, and Ryan, why don't you give some plugs, and we'll say goodnight to everyone.
All right, check out.
I like to plug in
go
my
ahead,
camera.
Ryan. Go ahead, Ryan.
Because it hasn't worked all night. No, I'm just around on Facebook, Twitter, at Ryan K. Boman, same name everywhere. And you guys are a lot more famous than me, so I'll let you get to your, all your stuff.
and for those of you who don't know what Ryan looks like, he's a double for Hugh Hefner. His camera's not on today.
No, you're right. Absolutely. Put a pipe in his mouth and give him like a captain's outfit, and you'd have a dead ringer. If they do a biopic, you should get a call.
Yeah, that's
guys,
right.
I appreciate that, but if I had seen half as many naked women as Hugh Hefner has, you probably wouldn't be talking to me right now.
We said you look like him. We didn't say you were lucky like him. You look like him.
I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you.
No, thanks, Brian. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's great having
Where's
you back.
Evan at? Tell him where you're at, Evan.
Well, if you're wondering what this cap is, this is actually an imaginary wrestling group from Sheldon Goldberg's book, the last fall, and this is a piece of promotional material. I just happened to throw it on because I just threw it on and I didn't even think about it. So yeah, that's what this is. This is not an actual.
Sheldon's doing okay. I hope Sheldon's doing better than the last time I checked in.
I know Sheldon forever, and yeah, check out Evan Ginsberg's Old School Wrestling Memories Facebook page. Check out Wrestling Then and Now, the documentary. We have it on Tubi and Amazon Prime. Check out 350 Days, and of course, ProWrestlingStories.com. I'm the senior editor over there. But yeah, I just want to say I have such great memories of Alpha and Kevin Sullivan in ring. I saw them live so many times over the years. Oh God, I mean, between the two, I would probably say 50 plus times. I mean, over the years, they were both around forever, and yeah, and Alpha, you know, like I said, I actually worked with on the Wrestlers, so. Kevin Sullivan had a really funny experience. It was actually kind of embarrassing. If you want me to tell a quick story.
Sure, please do. Go ahead.
At a convention, Kevin Sullivan was on a panel, and Percy Pringle / Paul Bearer was there. And I'm paraphrasing because it was a long, long time ago. And I said my question was along the lines of, you know, isn't the Undertaker's shtick where he's like dead and suddenly gets up in the middle of the ring, in the middle of the match, in the middle of the ring? Isn't that like a wee bit over the top? And Kevin Sullivan actually says to me, "Stand up." And I'm like, uh-oh. So I'm standing up in this room full of people. And he goes, "You do know, sir, that wrestling is about drawing money, and that's exactly what The Undertaker did." So I couldn't really argue with that. But as an old school fan, you know, to me, the gimmick was a little over the top. But Kevin Sullivan disagreed with me. So
that's funny. That's
true
cute.
Story.
Well, Kevin always liked that kind of sort of darker character like that. I can understand why he liked The Undertaker, because he sort of was into kind of some of that macabre type stuff, you know, and I guess that worked. I mean, I guess Mr. Calloway made a real good career out of it.
Well, they all kind of did a coming back from the dead shtick, whether it was Bruno getting pounded or Chief J Strongbow going into like a war dance. They all kind of like
or
came back,
hulking out, you know.
Yeah, hulking out.
The best one was the Ultimate Warrior grabbing the ropes and doing that.
Ricky Morton made a career of getting pounded and making the big hot tag, you know. So
sure.
Kerry Von Erich, the same way when Kerry would do that thing where he looked like he was going crazy in the ring. Well, you know, that got people hot. It fired them up. You know, I guess it's all kind of the same thing. At the end of the day, it's whatever gets people excited.
Yeah. The Undertaker reminded me of Halloween when you know, Michael Myers would suddenly get up.
Sit up and no sell gunshots and knife wounds and things like that. Not so much for the Undertaker, but definitely, you know, part of the shtick. Anyway, guys, we're out of time for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us this week, Ryan, and thank you, Evan, as always.
Thank you.
We'll see you. Well, hopefully, Ryan will have you on again soon. And Evan,
I appreciate it. Sorry I was late to the party, man.
Not a problem. You were a great contributor to tonight's show. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah,
good night,
Russell,
everybody.
hang on 1 minute after the show.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Take care, guys.